Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
As you will have heard, I've been obsessed with what's in the actual program, but I think that might railroad us into covering a lot of things that we've talked a lot about, and I know that you have thoughts sort of beyond that, but sticking with my pattern so far, let's look at the title of the session. How many qubits do we really need? Go on.
Is this just where I say 100,000, do a mic drop and run?
You could.
Okay.
100,000? What?
We need a lot more qubits than people realize.
Why?
For what people genuinely know you can use a quantum computer for today, that's kind of like the lower limit, right? That's why you look at, DARPA, quantum benchmarking, et cetera, and they say, unless you can get to 100,000, go home. That's not to say that we won't find use cases along the way, and I think there's been some fantastic work at really hammering down that number, reducing it as much as possible. But that's kind of like the entry point now for something that's provably useful, economically relevant on a quantum computer.
Okay. Why do you settle on that number? If you say a lot more than what people are saying, and a hush fell over the crowd, how do you then settle?
I don't have the right kind of mic to drop, do I? It would just be like throwing it.
It wouldn't be as dramatic, really.
No.
So why is that the number then? Why aren't you couching that in, given error correction of this goodness?
Okay. People kind of wax lyrical about logical qubits, and it's like, oh, we can make a 2-qubit logical qubit. And then you look into that and you're like, okay, that's not a logical qubit. That's something that can detect an error. It can't even correct for an error. And you look at all of the algorithms out there, how deep they have to run, you get to numbers that are like 100 to 1,000 qubits per logical qubit is what's needed to really run deep, useful quantum algorithms. And then you look at the number of qubits to have a useful algorithm. And you're looking at maybe 300 or so perfect qubits for some of these early chemistry stages. You multiply one number by the other number, and you get to around 100,000. Like there's some nuance in there, but that's why it's that kind of number.
Okay. And just to be clear, you think everybody who's talking in the sort of tens and hundreds and maybe even thousands and so on is gravely mistaken?
No, I think that they're enthusiastic about what could be a possible use case. That's not saying they're gravely mistaken.
Okay.
These things could emerge. They'll only emerge with us getting machines out there and getting people using them. I'm violently in agreement with that. I'm just saying in terms of like provable things that if you gave someone a quantum computer today and said like, go, you start printing money, you need a lot of qubits. And that's why we're doing it the way we're doing it, right?
Right.
We didn't start with, I've got 1 qubit, let's make a few more of them until I get something useful. We started with, we need a lot of qubits, let's work backwards from what are the things that mankind has made hundreds of thousands or millions of those, and it's like grains of rice, kernels of corn, and silicon transistors. And I couldn't think of a good way to make a quantum computer out of grains of rice or kernels of corn, so we settled on transistors.
Okay. As neat a segue as I could expect into the description. What matters more, quantity, quality, or architecture? Because you're an architecture guy.
But you're going to talk about like cornflakes or something. That was
No, I want to know about your rice computer. Tell me more about your rice computer.
Come to Quantum Motion, we've got a water computer, which makes the same point. Anyway, sorry, going back to your question, that's for a later stage. Quality, quantity, they are equally important. You need to have a heck of a lot of high quality things. Previous speakers have talked about thresholds, how good you need your qubits to be. And even if you've got a heck of a lot of them, if you have them all beneath this certain threshold, it will be useless. I like the notion that Simon Benjamin, one of the co-founders at Quantum Motion, has. It's kind of like error correction is like fixing a watch wearing boxing gloves. If you are just below that threshold, then you're just making it worse. You can try your damnedest to try and extract the entropy from the system, but you are just making it worse unless you're beyond some threshold. And then kind of getting beyond that threshold is like taking the boxing gloves off and like, wow, you're a Swiss watchmaker now, not Mike Tyson.
What I like about this, I said at the beginning, the things that have changed, the things that haven't changed in the industry, even over the short life of this conference, is the number of things that stick around, and still this discussion around how many qubits. In super early days, it was we made one with 8, we made one with 9. I think the first thing I ever read about quantum computing many years ago said that if you could build one with 50 qubits, you could solve the universe and all this sort of thing. But I love that for all the progress that's been made, there is still this distinction, this competition, the rash suggestion that you need 100,000 of them. Without wishing to get into a platform debate, though, you've come to that conclusion somewhat because of the platform that you work with, which you've settled on why.
Well, it was settled in reverse. So it was very much looking at what do we need to make a quantum computer and how can we get that? And that's not to say that other approaches won't get to that number either, right? Like that's why I really do like things like DARPA and other organizations who have set these targets. And that's not to besmirch anyone else's approach. You know, ion trap companies are in that and have a very credible way to get to a very large number of qubits. Photonic companies are in that competition, you know, as a superconducting companies. It will be a different machine. You know, your kind of 100,000 plus qubit machine will be a different machine if it's made with one of these modalities. But indeed, in the same way as our rice-based computer, you know, you can make conventional computers from anything you like, water, rice, sand, cogs, or you can make them with transistors. And that's exactly the same with a quantum computer. It's just that if you make it with something that's 40 nanometers big, you'll end up with a computer that's the size of a rack. If you make it with qubits that are a few millimeters or a few tens of millimeters in size, you'll end up with something that's the size of a building. Now, that's not to say it won't exist. It's just that the use cases or the people who will buy that thing and then get a commercial return are just going to see that at a different point. If you make a facility size machine that's 300 meters long and costs £250 million, then France will have one, the UK will have one, China will have 5, and the US will have 6 because they've got to beat China. That's kind of the way that it will work if you have a machine that costs that much and is a facility. And that wasn't the vision that I started out a company to create.
That's fair. And again, without wishing to retread a bunch of things that we ended up talking a lot about in the earlier session, coming back to the description, if I may, for one last visit, where's the true threshold for commercial value? Do you believe that's a sensible question?
I actually very much agree. It was the guy from Inflection, wasn't it, back in Cellar? I agree wholeheartedly with that. If you can find someone who pays for it and expects to get a commercial return, that's the point at which we're, the tipping point to having a commercially useful quantum computer. Obviously, then you're saying, well, what is the use case that promotes such a person to do that? But then we're in an endless loop, and I think we should leave those discussions in the morning. But I wholeheartedly endorse that as the kind of measure as when is this commercially useful.
Well, then, in that case, wishing to pick your brain about different things instead, another question that came up in the morning session was, what's it take to get there? Again, without prejudice to where are you now and where do you want to get to, but what stands between us and that commercial use case, the money making, in your mind?
Yeah, well, it's numbers and it's integration. And I think that's where we come back to hardware and some of the really dull stuff that you actually need to do to get there. So it's not just about making qubits. Think of some of the early TV screens and you'd have, things that emit light. And it's actually the things that emit light is the easy bit. It's the things that control the things that emit light, which is the hard bit. And so a lot of what we spend our time doing, and actually a lot of companies spend their time doing, is just the control stack and the control architecture behind it and how to miniaturize that and stop that swelling to the size of a building. Because it's one thing to have a really small qubit, but then if you need, for every single qubit, racks of GPUs to understand and control the damn thing, then that's not a scalable machine either. So I think that doesn't get kind of sung about enough. We'd all talk about, ion traps versus silicon spin versus superconducting, but actually saying, how do we control these things? And how is it not all of that other stuff and readout that's going to cause the machine to swell is a very important, but maybe too technical question.
Maybe. Instead, you've pulled the lens out a little bit from sort of qubit level to sort of machine level. Pull it out further. What else do we need? What's missing?
Well, once you get up to that, you have a whole bunch of qubits. You need to be able to control them using electronics. How do you control the electronics? Having a
postdocs.
A classic postdocs, exactly. But postdocs aren't scalable. Neither are, children. I did have this notion of 100,000 children each controlling a qubit, but that's as unscalable as it is cruel. So
almost made a new line there.
I don't endorse child labor. Just make sure you get that.
Yeah.
No, it's an incredibly important point, and you pull that up to having a control stack above that's sending pulses down to those. And there's some really interesting then other parts of the stack. You know, companies like Classique that raised yesterday, their kind of cross or somewhat neutral sense of compilation is really interesting. I think finding people that can genuinely provide value across many different modalities of quantum computer is very hard. Lots of people will say they can, but that's the level of the stack where you genuinely can, have some real impact. That's kind of the way I see it.
It goes further, though. Indulge me this. Pull out the lens further at sort of lab level,
I thought you said
level,
I thought you
country
said
level,
we were going to go away from
No, I mean, like, what's missing?
use cases. You're going to come up with use cases, aren't you? Tell me the damn use case.
And we have to talk about benchmarks endlessly. No, honestly, because in having a word with you, you mentioned, for example, supply chains, something that hasn't come up. I have a big hang up myself on the talent pipeline, something that hasn't come up much yet, and so on.
Yes.
We're in thinking about how do we get there without thinking too much about the scandalous number of qubits you think we need to use. What stands between us and that?
I was in Washington yesterday with our ambassador and the Aussie ambassador talking about exactly this point. So we're based in the UK primarily, but we have a base in Australia, base in the US, Penn State, and also growing in Spain. And finding a way in which we can just stop being so damned nationalistic is incredibly important. So I guess in many ways I'm a kind of like a free trade liberal, but a national security hawk. And I think finding a way that we can balance those in quantum is incredibly important.
I got a magazine for you, by the way.
Is it called The Economist?
Carry on.
Yes. No, so I think finding a way that we can actually trade with our allies, not have to have the entire stack of everything in the UK and say, well, okay, great, you want to make a silicon chip, therefore we need to have a $10-20 billion foundry in the UK, and we need to have our own packaging industry in the UK, and we need to sell in the UK. Like, that's clearly nonsense, and actually finding a better way to make sure that we do have a broader look and we keep engaging globally is incredibly important, because otherwise we'll not just fail as the UK, we'll kind of fail globally to actually achieve the interesting things that we can do with the world's most powerful computer.
Do you think that what you specifically work on, the sort of MOS approach, keeping it in semiconductor fashion, actually exacerbates that problem of, again, sort of small number of places in the world that can do this, small number of companies that can make the machines that do this, and smaller still the number of companies that make the machine, and so on?
I would challenge you to find any other process that can make 100,000 or 1 million of anything at the yield that the semiconductor process can do.
Sure. I'm just asking if it sort of complicates the geopolitical angle that you're hinting at there.
Potentially. Obviously, if you could farm these things, that would be better. You can't. So we have to work out how we work together with people and have a supply chain where we're not just talking about a 1 million qubit chip, but we're talking about something where you can make 1 million qubit chips. And that's the vision that I want. Not the one where we have China and the US fighting out over it, but where this technology is so abundant that we're actually just using it. And that's where use cases will come in, right? You get it to the hands of people, and smart people do cool things. That's how AI came about. Geoffrey Hinton thought, gosh, there's something interesting I could do here. And guess what? I have a whole lot of cheap compute, and it's too stupid to work, but I'm going to give it a go. And guess what? It worked. And that was the birth of machine learning. And unless we have that, so that there is some 14-year-old girl sitting in her room thinking, I've got this nutty notion of what a quantum computer could be used for, and she can sit down, she can use it because it doesn't cost $1 billion for a country to have one. And that's where we'll genuinely see the world-changing things that will come from this technology, is just getting it out to people. And that comes from making it cheap.
Again, sort of returning to the notion that you need the end users, whoever they may be, to help
Absolutely.
along. Even if it is armies of 14-year-old girls with great curiosity about quantum. That's what we need. That's what this whole industry needs.
It's true, right? Ever since I was 14, admittedly a boy rather than a girl, I've been on a steady downward slope. So I would rather kind of make sure that we pass this on to the next generation, who are magnificently more intelligent. They're far more open-minded and enthusiastic about engaging with new things. I'd still rather use a pencil.
That's as happy a notion as we could hope to end on. James, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure.